So if it's patent, then normally it's a straightforward license will be available. There'll be the option potentially of purchasing the patent. That tends to be pretty expensive because the costs associated with getting the patent in the first place tend to be large. So purchasing of patents normally is the domain of pretty big companies with large large earnings, probably up into the millions, if not tens or even hundreds of millions of pounds, because buying patents does tend to be very expensive. But if it's a patent, that patented technology, it's normally a straightforward license, and then you're in business. You have the opportunity within the constraints of the license, maybe by market, maybe by territory, but nevertheless you have the wherewithal to pick up the technology and utilise it within the constraints of the license. If however, it's trade secret or knowledge based, then it's more difficult, as we talked about before. It's more difficult to find a way to get that IP into third parties' hands to allow those third parties to realise the value in the IP without divulging your initial secret, your trade secret. So in the scenario where you're on the buying end rather than the offering end, in that instance, the IP owner might require a more substantial or permanent basis for the transfer of the knowledge. So if there is to be transfer, sometimes that would only be possible via a more permanent link-up between organisations, such as a joint venture or a share exchange or buy-in, which means that the value in the IP, the owner of the IP, has a more long-term and structured involvement with the utilisation of the IP, and more visibility of its use over the longer term. So if the let's say that it's on the basis then that this manages to get arranged, either whether it's a trade secret like the Coca-Cola route, where there was the trade secret was managed via concentrate, or whether it's so there's some way of packaging the trade secret, which is acceptable to you as well, or if it's a straight license on a patent. So whichever way, you have a license, and if it's on the basis of a royalty payment, it's vital to incorporate this whilst planning. And as I've already touched on, this doesn't, in the instance of a royalty payment, there may be an upfront payment, but it doesn't tend to be too onerous. It does tend to be on the basis of per unit manufactured and shipped, or remuneration earned on a per unit basis, or a per unit delivery of service. And so it's important to add this in when a deal is being negotiated. This is working back to front where we were talking about the £2.75 before, if you remember. This is working the other way around. The owner of the IP will be saying to you, well, I need at least £2.75 royalty payment per unit if you want to take this. And so you need to think to yourself, well, is this going to work for me? Am I still going to be able to make money if I buy in this tech, this IP, and I know I'm going to have to pay the owner £2.75 for every unit. So those of you who came to the New Product Development Seminar will be familiar with this type of diagram. For those who didn't, just very briefly, so what we've got here is a basic diagram, and it really maps out. It allows you to think about things like break-even points and loss-making regions, profitability regions. When you paint a scenario of, I think I need to invest X amount of money in overhead on an ongoing basis. My variable cost, that's the cost of either manufacture of a product or the cost of delivery of one increment of service. So you could model that. and you have a strong feeling for what you can get in terms of sales income. So when you map these onto a little graph like this, so overhead, if you look at your cash flow, overhead is typically the raft of stuff that sits at the bottom of your cash flow. So it's things like rent and rates and light and heat and insurance and fuel for your vehicle and things like that. So those overheads will typically be pretty much the same whether you sell 1 unit or 2 units or 10 units, whether you deliver 1 unit of service or 100 units of service. Those overheads would tend to be pretty constant. We did talk about the scenario where you have to take another person on, and that puts glitches in. But let's take it as simplistic for the moment, whereby to deliver a range of units, let's say from 0 to 10,000, your overheads, you do it all with the same number of people, the same premises, etc. So your overheads would be the same. It doesn't make any difference whether you deliver 10 units or 100 units, your basic overheads are going to be the same. It's still going to be £500 a month, or whatever it might be. So then you have the variable cost, and the variable cost adds on, and so if it's going to cost £5 of variable cost to put together all the parts to make the laser pointer, or it's going to cost £5 of time and resources to deliver 1 unit of service, if it's a service business. So we would add this on here. So if in the scenario where, let's say, 1 unit or 10 units of service is here, this little bit would then be the equivalent of the cost to be able to put 10 units of service or 10 units of product into play. So what we have then, so this line effectively is variable cost and overheads on a sliding scale depending on how many units you create. And at the bottom then, we have our sales income. So that starts from 0, because if we sell none, we make none. If we sell 1 unit, we make 1 unit's worth of income. So that starts from 0. And if we thought about this properly, this line is going to be steeper than the variable cost line, because obviously we want to be selling something for much more than it costs us to make it. Although I did tell an anecdote in the previous seminar where I came across one customer, one client, who made one particular product for less than he was selling it for less than it cost him to make it. So in that case, instead of his curves crossing over, they'd be diverging. So the more he sold, the more he lost. So in this instance, then we have our sales line here, and you can see as sales increases, so it catches up with the combination of overhead, which is flat, and variable cost, until we get to this crossover point, and that's the break-even, that's the nominal break-even point. So up until that point, we've been making loss, cost is higher than income, and after this point, now income is higher than the combined costs, so we're making operating profit. So if we can get past this crossover point, then we're into profit. So that's just a brief resume of where we were before, and that break-even point, so that's the number of units for break-even, UBE, and sales income for break-even is there. Okay, now then, you perhaps recall last time we were talking about selling through distributors and through shops and the like. And in that instance, you remember that we showed that this blue line would actually would hinge down, because we weren't selling at list price anymore. We were selling wholesale, and our sales income per unit was dropping. So if you remember last time, this line had hinged down to show a red line, which was reduced sales income. Now, this one works the other way. Now, we're having to pay a royalty. So, if we were going to be manufacturing in-house, we'd have these operational costs, these overheads, and we'd have this variable cost. Let's assume that even by bringing in somebody else's technology, there's a kind of a price set in the market, and we can't really go more than that. You know, there are competitive products for this, so I can't really go much more than 50 quid for this laser pointer. I try and sell it at 70, I'm looking overpriced. So market has set a rate, so I can't really push my sales income up. So in this instance, the sales income line is unchanged. And again, overheads aren't changed, although you can argue that perhaps if it meant that you didn't need so many R&D staff, you could perhaps bring your overheads down a little bit, or if it simplified your business, you could perhaps bring your overheads down a little bit. But for simplicity's sake, where the change comes is that effectively, because we're paying a royalty, which is a per unit royalty, it's effectively added money onto the cost, onto the variable cost. So effectively what we're doing here, we're working on the variable cost and have hinged that up to add in that 275 or whatever it is per unit of additional variable cost to make our new variable cost including royalty. And so now that's moved our crossover point, and we can see in this scenario, we can see that to still achieve break even, in this scenario, we'll need to sell this many more units, and by doing so achieving this much more sales volume. Okay, so this is just a quick way, again, it doesn't go into some of the real subtleties about when you take extra staff on or whatever, but it's just to get a grasp on how royalty impacts upon the business performance and on break-even point and the point at which you can start to earn profit.